we must put the current conflict in context, that it is clearly about the Russian geopolitical interests.
That's right.
They felt threatened by how Ukraine had become so pro-West, and they felt threatened by Ukraine's application to join NATO. Look, there are very few countries that will accept adversaries coming so close, using a neighboring country as, if you like, a launch pad. Let's remember that because of, the Cold War, era, you still have a lot of mistrust, a lot of bad blood. The Cold War may seem to be over, but it's still simmering. It never really went away totally. And so Russia had served notice many years ago, actually even during the 2014 invasion of Crimea, that they would not accept a situation where, Ukraine is admitted into NATO and where the Western allies like the United States, Germany, France, Britain, use Ukraine as a military base. And there is history of that.
That gives them 600 kilometers away from Moscow.
Absolutely, so close, so close. And you see, we must be guided by history. The Russians remember how after the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 in Cuba, which was fought by, that was the one led by Cuban dissidents in the United States of America. That was foiled. After that, the Cubans reached out to the Russians for help. So in 1962, the Russians established a military base, erected missiles in Cuba.
That's right.
The Americans said, hell no. We are not going to allow you to establish a base only 90 miles away from the United States of America. And that led to the what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. There was then fear of the possibility of full blown-out nuclear war. And eventually, the Russians had to leave Cuba. As we speak, Cuba continues to face sanctions from the United States of America because of what happened in 1962. So the Russians are saying, and this is from the Russian perspective, I do not necessarily have to agree with that position, but just put yourself in their shoes. That's their perspective. They are saying that if we were prevented in 1962 from establishing a military base in Cuba, 90 miles away from the United States of America, and we suffered the consequences, we had to leave Cuba, with our tails in between our legs. Why should we then allow you, decades after, in 2022, to not only establish a base, but to allow Ukraine to join NATO? And we all know the implications of Ukraine joining NATO. There's an Article 5 in that North Atlantic Treaty where any incursion into a NATO member country, it is a declaration of war. And all of NATO's, all the 30 members of NATO will descend on you. And you really will struggle, because if you put, the Russian military might together, their population of about 150 million, their GDP of about 12 trillion, it's nowhere near that of NATO when they decide to pool resources and descend on the Russians. So I think that we are where we are because of lack of, proactive leadership. As far back in 2014, will you believe that the respected Henry Kissinger, the 98-year-old, not 98-year-old, former U.S. Secretary of State who served under Nixon and Ford, he put out an article in the Washington Post in 2014. And in his book, The World Order, a copy of which I have here, he warned about these consequences and put together, if you don't mind, these suggestions, these recommendations. I'll read through quickly. It says, leaders of all sides should return to examining outcomes, not compete in posturing. Here is my notion of an outcome compatible with the values and security interests of all sides. 1, Ukraine should have the right to choose freely its economic and political associations, including with Europe. 2, Ukraine should not join NATO, a position I took 7 years ago when it last came up. 3, Ukraine should be free to create any government compatible with the express will of its people. Wise Ukrainian leaders would then opt for a policy of reconciliation between the various parts of their country internationally. They should pursue a posture comparable to that of Finland. That nation leaves no doubt about its fierce independence and cooperates with the West in most fields, but carefully avoids institutional hostility toward Russia. 4, it is incompatible with the rules of the existing world order for Russia to annex Crimea, but it should be possible to put Crimea's relationship to Ukraine on a less fraught basis. To that end, Russia will recognize Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea. Ukraine should reinforce Crimea's autonomy in elections held in the presence of international observers. The process will include removing any ambiguities about the status of the Black Sea Fleet at Sevastopol. These are principles, not prescriptions. People familiar with the region will know that not all of them will be palatable to all parties. The test is not for absolute satisfaction, but balanced dissatisfaction. If some solution based on these or comparable elements is not achieved, the drift toward confrontation will accelerate. The time for that will come soon enough. Unquote. So you see, Ukraine's foreign policy too has not helped its cause. I think that President Zelensky was a bit too naive.
We will